Good morning. It's about time to begin our Bible class this morning. We are in a study of Genesis, and when you read Genesis, you really realize that what we have in God's Word is truly a gift. It's really a gift. We don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where we've come from. It's given to us in a concise, simple, easy to understand couple of chapters, and that's truly a gift. He also gives us a pattern of what our days are going to look like, what our years are going to look like, what our seasons are going to look like, and really that's a demonstration of love. We don't waste a lot of time trying to figure out where we've come. He's given us these, even though this isn't an evidences class, and I think we've said that enough in this class, we do have these evidences all around us. We have the sun, we have the moon. We wake up every day and it's there, and maybe sometimes we take that for granted, but Genesis wasn't written to explain or give meaning to things that were already in existence. It was written to document and give evidence that God created the heavens and the earth. He created the world and everything in it. And sometimes when we see these evidences around us, we take them for granted. A couple of 3 pictures here. You know, when we see a rainbow, we don't see that every day, right? And when we see it, it grabs our attention. Right? There's usually people pointing to it. Hey, did you see the rainbow? We happened to walk out of the jungle, forest, whatever you want to call it, and turned around and bam, there was this rainbow that unlike I'd ever seen in my life. And I know when we see a rainbow, it does remind us of God's promise. And really, that's what we need to think of when we see the sun and the moon every day, is that God made those, and He's very near. If we want Him to be, He's very near. I had never seen a rainbow where I could see every color, and that picture doesn't even do it justice. I can't imagine what the rainbow looked like that Noah saw. It just must have been impressive. And then also the stars. There are certain areas of our country, national parks, that are dark sky parks, where they have to do special things so that light doesn't interfere with you being able to see the stars at night. And not everybody can do it. Evidently, it's a pretty difficult thing to achieve, and you definitely can't see a picture like that in the city, for sure. But when I see that, where you can see the Milky Way with the naked eye, not sure, somebody's giving me a signal, but I'm sure they'll figure it out. When you see the picture there with the stars, it's just so impressive. And I think of passages like we're going to look at today in Genesis chapter 15, verse 5, when God talks to Abraham and He calls him out of his tent. And He says, "Look toward the heaven and count the stars. If you are able to number them, so shall your descendants be." And so when you see something like that, you know, I try to put myself in the shoes of these people we're trying to study, and it's hard. It's hard to do a lot of times because of everything that we know, and we know much more than they knew about the story here in the Bible. But it's impressive when you see things like that. It should bring you back these evidences to God and His love for us and His closeness. You know, it's people that spend their careers trying to figure out where we've come from. They spend lifetimes trying to figure this out, and we have it. We don't have to know any of that information. And it reminds me of this wisdom that they've communicated in these degrees and the letters behind their names. When you read 1 Corinthians 3, starting in verse 18, it says, "If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him be a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God." And even though what we believe may be foolishness, we are so much wiser than these people that spend careers studying this information. But a study of Genesis also gives us real insight into the heart and the mind of God. And that's the real importance of it. And that's a powerful, powerful thing. I had a conversation with an individual years ago, and they said that they would never believe in God because of how violent and bloodthirsty God was. And my response back to them was, "Have you ever studied the Bible?" And they said, "Well, I've read books." And I said, "Have you ever studied the Bible? Because you don't have to go past Genesis to see that God is patient, He's long-suffering, He's kind, He's merciful. But at some point, you do hold people accountable for the things they do. And that's what David has said. That's what Daniel said up here this morning. It prevents chaos. It prevents chaos. And our society is kind of headed towards chaos because we don't hold people accountable for the things they do. But our focus this morning is on Abraham, Sarah. Within that, you can't pull out Hagar, you can't pull out Ishmael, you can't pull out Lot. And so we're going to try to study some of these things this morning. God is establishing this plan, and it starts in Genesis. But when man deviates from that plan, then what happens when man deviates from God's plan? It doesn't work. Problems start to happen, right? Things don't work like they should. Does that stop God's plan from moving forward? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And so, if you would, we're not going to be able to read a lot of passages today, but if you would turn with me to Galatians chapter 4, starting in verse 21. You know how there are some movies where at the very beginning of it, they show you the ending, and then they go back and they work up to that? That's kind of what we're going to do today. This is kind of the ending of what we're talking about today. Galatians 4, 21 through 31. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise, which things are symbolic, for these are the two covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor, for the desolate has many more children than she has a husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise, but as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. So God can even take deviations from His plan and incorporate them into His plan, which what He's done over the course of history and in the Scriptures. But when we deviate from God's plan, we may still suffer punishment, but it won't be banishment from the face of God, which is what caused great fear and anxiety within Cain. We may still be held accountable, but we won't be removed from the face of God. Adam and Eve deviated from God's plan. Cain deviated from God's plan. This corrupt civilization deviated from God's plan. And when that happens, they're removed. They're removed from God. And so we're left today talking about Abraham and Sarah, and there are times when they deviate from God's plan. But you can see there are a number of chapters that encompass this Abraham and Sarah topic. Chapter 12 is the call. Chapter 13, this split between Abraham and Lot. Chapter 14, this kidnapping, so to speak, of Lot. The covenant. There's confusion about Ishmael, Isaac. There's laughter and these name changes. There's visitors and more laughing. There's this negotiation that takes place between God and Abraham. And there's lots of lessons from Lot. And then there's this rush to judgment, so to speak, and Sarah, my sister, again. So there's a lot of ground to cover. So let's just kind of to jump in here. Why did God call or choose Abraham? What do we have up to this point that would give us evidence that this is the reason God chose Abraham? Okay, that's the answer. There's really not anything that would demonstrate to us that he did this, therefore God is choosing him. Nothing. God knows the hearts of individuals, and maybe he knew the heart of Abraham, but I don't think we really find written evidence of why God called Abraham, really till we get to Genesis 18:19. So let's turn there quickly, Genesis 18:19, and let's read that verse. Genesis 18:19. And this is when the three visitors come and appear to Abraham. And they ask about Sarah. They're there to go validate what has arisen to heaven in the evilness of these cities, these wicked cities. And he's debating whether to tell Abraham what he's there to do. And so when he says in verse 17, jumping back, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm doing? And then in 19 he says, he's going to, for I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So he trusts Abraham that he's going to use the information that he's going to tell him in the right way. And according to that passage, what is the right way that Abraham is going to use that information? What's he going to do with that? Why in the world would Abraham need to know that information? Exactly. And teach his house, and his children teach their children, and their children teach their children, till it gets down to us and we learn it today. He's entrusted with this information really as the father of a nation, and we're trusted with it as authorities in our household to pass it down. But there's that trust. And the question we've got to ask ourselves is, can God trust us with this information to do the right thing with it? Okay, so what was the call and how did Abraham answer it? He obeyed it. Yeah, he obeyed it. And so why did Abraham have to call Sarah his sister? Okay, and that's a good answer. He didn't have to. But why did he? He did, so why did he? To protect himself, maybe a lack of faith for sure. Anybody else want to take a... And those are right answers. Those aren't wrong answers, for sure.
Provide an example of man not trusting in God and trying to accomplish His will by their own might, so to speak. So Abraham was thinking he was being sort of cunning and wise here, but he wasn't.
Yeah. Was Abraham supposed to be where he was when he felt like he had to call Sarah his sister? Where was he when he did that? Egypt. Was he supposed to be in Egypt? No, he wasn't supposed to be in Egypt. If he wouldn't have been in Egypt, he wouldn't have had the pressure to have to call Sarah his sister. So that's one of the first deviations we have from God's plan, is he put himself in a situation where he had to do something that wasn't right. Technically, it's right, and he tries to explain that, but that sounds like, I don't know. I'm not a woman. I don't know how it would feel for my husband to call me his sister because he's afraid. Evidently, in that kind of pressure, it would have been the thing to do, because I don't see Abraham as a weak individual. When I see him go after Lot, I don't know what the young people call it now, but in my day, he was a bad dude. You're not messing with my nephew. We're coming after you. So I don't think Abraham is a weak individual at all, but he put himself in a situation where he had to come up with this reason in order to survive. Okay, so we have lots of lessons from Lot. We're all familiar with the story of the split and the lessons that can be learned from that. But Abraham basically gets Lot. There's strife between the herdsmen. And there are multiple times where Abraham, and let me just go back and say, if I say Abraham instead of Abram and Sarah instead of Sarah, I know the difference, and, I'm just doing the best I can. So you don't have to come up after and tell me, well, Doug, and okay. So Abraham gives Lot a choice, right? The herdsmen argue, and I feel like that this is the first time that Abraham really saves Lot's life. I think there's two other occasions where he does. But the strife here is not just, they're quarreling. It's laying wait kind of strife, laying wait to take somebody's life. This was serious. And so Abraham gives Lot a choice. And so what's the choice that he gives Lot? Choose the land. Choose the land. Okay, so what did that approach, Abram's approach, the very first bullet up there, to the issue reflect about Abraham or Abram? He's willing to put himself after Lot, looking out for his brother's son's best interest, his nephew's best interest. And so we can learn a lesson from that. We have to be careful about the options that we give people. And the second command is to love your neighbor as yourself. And really, Abraham goes above and beyond that in this situation. So Lot obviously chooses what? The greener pastures, exactly. I really like this map up here. So Lot lifts up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, compared to the Garden of Eden. Then Lot chose all the plain of Jordan for himself. And when you look at where, it's hard to see, but up at the top left of the map, you got Bethel and Ai, and that's kind of where they were at this particular time. And you can see all those blue rivers going down the right side of the screen, the well-watered plains of Jordan. And that's what he was seeing. You don't see a lot of that on the other side. You kind of see the rugged mountain. And Lot lifts up his eyes. What could Lot have done in this situation that might have made things a little better? Yeah, he could have just flipped the script and said, hey, you go first. I mean, that would have been good. That would have been good. What else could he have done? Yeah, I mean, all the plain. I mean, he could have said, look, let me take the first three rivers, you take the next three, let's share that, we'll have green pastures for everybody, but he didn't. It was almost like he was googly-eyed when he saw that and like, man, this is great. This is going to make me look good. It almost sounds like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? It was pleasing to the eye, it was great to eat, it was, all these things. And so, he looked up, it was pleasing to the eye, it was well-watered. He's going to look great coming back to the herdsman and saying, look at this deal I negotiated with Abraham. So, it looks a lot like that first temptation with Adam and Eve. But decisions have consequences, obviously. So we all kind of know what those consequences are, and we're going to talk about those in this split. But also people are watching. In Genesis 13:7, they're kind of sharing this land with other groups of people. And whether that's to show that, there was confinement here, or whether that's to show that, look, we need to resolve this because we're not setting a good example and influence to these other people, calling ourselves followers of God when our herdsmen are out there creating a ruckus. Okay, and then we've talked about this concept of the progression of sin before in relation to Adam and Eve and Cain and even Peter. But it's evident here with Lot. Lot parted from Abraham. He chose all the best lands. He moved into the area of sinful cities. He sat in Sodom's gate, which kind of signifies some kind of leaders. That's where business is done, right? Leadership, politician, commerce, something along those lines. Then he moved into the city, and then he had to flee the city. And so, I think sometimes that I give Lot a bad rap, when I look at all the people in the Bible, he's probably the closest to what we live in today. When I think, and I have to keep going back to that passage in the New Testament, which we'll look at where it says, and as I was studying this, keep in mind, Doug, righteous Lot is how he's referred to in the New Testament. So he subjected himself probably to a lot of things he didn't have to, but according to that scripture, he still remained righteous. I don't know that we can escape the things that we face because we're supposed to be in the world, just not of it. And just walking out your door, you face a lot of the things that Lot faced. Okay, so this is what I was referencing when I feel like Abraham saved Lot 3 times. When they split over the resource disputes, when Lot was captured by the kings, and when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And we'll take a look in a deeper sense on those following two in a little bit. But these in the first one, this split over the resources and disputes, that is something that it did take place, and so now they're split apart. But then these kings come in, and they basically take over these southern cities. They wipe them out of their wealth. They take the people away. Lot is taken with them. And Abraham says, And he puts together how many people? A large army to go after these people to rescue Lot? No, 318 people is what Abraham put together to go after these armies. And I don't think that we actually know how many people were involved against him, but I saw estimates of 135,000 people or so. And so this kind of sounds like what in the Bible? What other account? Gideon, absolutely. 300 men. I mean, these were 318 of Abraham's finest. And they moved fast and they moved quickly and they were very effective. So, did Abraham do that all on his own? No. I mean, there was obviously the hand of God in that. And so after that, and I'm going to rely on our teachers on Wednesday night to really do justice to Melchizedek, because that's mentioned in Hebrews, and I know they will. But Abraham comes in contact with Melchizedek after he returns with the people and all the goods. And Melchizedek says, "Blessed be Abraham, the Most High God." And so that's confirmation of Abraham's relationship with God. And hopefully to Abraham, that's confirmation when he hears that. Because Melchizedek's just not any king or any priest. And confirmation of Melchizedek's role and status when Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. So confirmation of each other from both of them. But from the king of Sodom, he was careful not to beholden himself to the king of Sodom. Sodom said, "Look, just take everything that you got in this battle, these battles that you fought, but give me back the people." So what was Abraham's response to that? No. No, and why did he not? It says he didn't want to beholden himself to the king of Sodom. What was it that he was fearful of that the king of Sodom would do? What's it say? From making him rich. Yeah, he would supplant God. God was the one that made Abraham wealthy. Abraham's a really wealthy guy at this particular time. And Lot ought to be saying it's great to have a rich uncle, because Lot is successful because of his righteous uncle. So Abraham was not going to allow himself to be beholden to the king. We can find ourselves in our day and time being beholden to certain things because of things that are given to us. What might we be beholden to in today's life that we ought to be very careful before we accept? Maybe it's a job in another location where they're going to give you a great salary to go there. There's going to be more responsibility. There's going to be more hours, and because of this salary, you're beholden to this company to work whatever hours they want you to work or whatever days they want you to work. Or even friends. You know, if you want to, in our younger days when, you may or may not wanted to have friends, I don't know, but when you accept certain things to have that friendship, you beholden yourself to kind of be an ally to that friend, which is not necessarily always a good thing. So there, we can find ourselves in a similar situation as well. Okay, so we're moving on, and we have this covenant, and we're in Genesis 15. If you would turn to Genesis 15 with me, and let's start in verse 1. Genesis 15, verse 1. Okay. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, "Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward." So this is after Abraham has had the successful routing of these kings. But Abraham said, "Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus?" Then Abraham said, "Look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir." Then he brought him outside and said, "Look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." And he believed in the Lord, and he had counted it to him for righteousness. So Abraham's asking for some kind of proof or confirmation that God's going to do for him what he says he will do. God has kind of been talking at a high level about, lots of descendants going to come from you, but nothing is really moving forward at an acceptable pace for Abraham. So he's asking for, when are these things going to happen? What proof do I have that these things are going to happen? I'm going childless. I'm well above the age, and what kind of proof can you give me? So, how does God respond to that? Yeah, there are a number of covenants that are kind of made in these passages, and it gets kind of confusing. But he makes a covenant with Abraham to give him this confidence that he needs. So it involves this 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, a young pigeon, and they're cut down the middle except for the 2 birds. And Abraham sits there and he's waiting for the next communication with God. And so, does that come immediately? No, it takes a while for that to come. As a matter of fact, I think it even gets dark there. And what's Abraham having to do this entire time? Well, vultures are coming down. He's having to, which may be something along the lines that he's going to have to be on guard against evil coming in with this covenant with God. And it's kind of a one-sided covenant. Usually when there's a covenant, two people would walk down between the cut animals. Here, it's just God. It's this furnace representing some kind of trial, and there's this lamp showing that there's going to be hope at the end. And so that's kind of it's a one-sided contract, basically, contract of adhesion. It's where if you want this service, then this is the way it's going to be. But what does Abraham have to do as his part of the covenant? Not a whole lot. It's a one-sided agreement, basically. It's a one-sided agreement. But he wanted confirmation. Is Abraham asking for confirmation a positive thing or a negative thing? Who else?
Every man goes through the same process to discover who our Creator is. We have to ask the same questions. and be led on the journey to come to the conclusion of the power of God.
Yeah, it's a comforting thing to have confirmation. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't believe, but it's nice to have confirmation in certain things. What's the worrisome thing is, how is God going to respond when you ask for confirmation? Because we have examples of people, for the most part, God seems to be okay with it. With Gideon and the fleece, he asked for a couple of confirmations there with the fleece. Moses, why are they going to listen to me? What can I do that's going to make them listen to me? So confirmation was the leprous hand and the staff being turned into a serpent. But what about Zechariah, John the Baptist's father? When he asked for confirmation, how will I know these things? Yeah, I mean, maybe that was a good thing? I don't know, but it doesn't sound like a good thing to me for 9 months to not be able to speak and communicate. Yeah, absolutely. And really, you view that as it was insulting to the Lord, that's all they want me for. And maybe that's part of the answer, is that, if it's an insult to the Lord because you don't believe, and that's the only reason you want to do that for entertainment, purposes, then maybe that's right. But even Thomas says, unless I see it, unless I touch it, not gonna believe it. And so he gets that confirmation, right? He gets the opportunity to do that. So for the most part, though, it seems like asking for confirmation is an okay thing if it's asked in the right way. Okay. Some of this is what we've already spoken here. God told Abraham that he would not see the fulfillment of the promise, that he would die at a nice old age. And he's going to basically have a fairly peaceful life. And he doesn't get upset when Abraham asks for confirmation. We talked about other people that have asked for confirmation. We do have confirmation of the promise, do we have confirmation of the promise that God has made to us? Yeah, what is that? The resurrection of Jesus. That's our confirmation. In this Galatians chapter 29, that was part of the passage that we read. If you're in Christ, you're Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So we have New Testament documentation and proof and evidence that God will do what He says He's going to do. Okay, so then we move on along to Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, and God too. Okay, so at this point, when you try to put yourself in Abraham's shoes, and God has told him He's going to have an heir, right? At this point, has He said that Sarah is going to be the mother of that heir? No, He hasn't. He hasn't said that. So you can kind of see from Abraham's perspective that that's a little confusing. That, okay, I know it's going to come from me. Sarah wants to help God's plan along. She's beyond the age. She starts to doubt, and she has this ill-conceived conception plan. And she's going to turn over Hagar to be another wife for Abraham. And Abraham complies with that. Like, okay. Yeah, but so we know that Abraham is not real sure. He knows that the seed is going to come through him, but he hadn't said anything about Sarah, so maybe, but from God's perspective, how is God looking at this? Is it clear to God? Yeah, why would it be clear to God? We should know why this should be clear to God. Well, it's clear to God because it's God's plan, but Abraham should have been able to know that it was clear that the seed would come through him and Sarah. Why is that? Husband and wife, that's right. There comes a time when a man shall leave his father and mother and cling unto his wife, right? Not wives, his wife. And even though that might have been somewhat of a common practice then, that was not God's plan from the very beginning, right? God's plan was one woman, one man, right? So Abraham could have made, it wasn't beyond reason to think that he could have made that rational decision. But when they do deviate from God's plan, what happens? Disorder, chaos, problems, all that occurs. So, does God's plan stop? Nope, keeps moving on. What did both Abraham and Sarah fail to do? Trust, stand firm in their faith. They failed to consult with the Lord if there were questions. Yeah, it wasn't moving along fast enough. If we don't do something to help out, then we're gonna be in trouble. We're not going to have this promise. This promise is important. We got to make sure it happens. Well, both of them are getting way too old. So, who did Sarah blame? She blames Abraham. I mean, let this be on you. And that kind of goes back to, they're really both to blame. No one's not to blame, but it kind of goes back to the Garden of Eden where, people are pointing fingers as, well, it's not my fault, you're to blame. You're to blame. So we had these strained relationships between everybody now, between Sarah and Hagar, Abraham and Sarah, Abraham and Hagar, Ishmael sent away ultimately. There's continuous fighting, there's no peace. So what happens is we have a situation here where we have this mistress-servant relationship with Hagar and Sarah that now becomes a competition between two wives, right? And problems result from that. We have these strained relationships. Okay, so Abraham's a little bit confused here. In Genesis 5:14, it says, "The heir born in your house shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir." And then later on in Genesis 17, we kind of have this clarification for Abraham when he says, "No, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son. But as for Ishmael, I've heard you." He's going to get blessed. He'll make him fruitful. He'll multiply him exceedingly. He'll beget 12 princesses, and he himself will become a great nation. Is that a good thing? The blessing of Ishmael?
Ishmael is the firstborn son of Abraham, and Abraham loves him, and of course the inheritance always goes to the firstborn. So God made a very important choice and decision that the Apostle Paul talks about later concerning who the sons of Abraham are. But God says, no, the child that, how do I phrase this? It's the child of promise that your descendants will be chosen, which Paul points out now that we are the children of promise and therefore sons of Abraham. Because God chooses us just as he chose Isaac, the second-born, just as he chose Jacob over Esau.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it comes across that it's a good thing. He's giving Abraham comfort that I'm going to take care of this child that you have. He's your child. And I think a lot of times we forget about Ishmael when we start talking about Isaac and the sacrifice that David's going to talk about. But he's about to lose two children that he had a lot of difficulty and trouble and heartbreak obtaining. And so it's a troubling thing for Abraham. He doesn't want Ishmael to be forgotten. But Ishmael, obviously associated with the Ishmaelites, he was named by God. God gave him his name. God will hear. Part of the Midianites, some but not all Arabs. The Midianites were part of that clan that bought Joseph from his brothers. And in Judges 8:24, they wore gold earrings. Evidently, they were known for wearing these gold earrings, and Gideon collecting all those and making an ephod out of it, which created problems for Gideon later on. But he'll be fruitful, and God will multiply him exceedingly. He'll beget 12 princesses. He'll be a great nation. All this is sounding great, but he'll be a wild man. And so if you're Hagar and you start to hear this, and Abraham, he'll be a wild man. Every everybody will be against him, and he will be against every person. You got to be thinking, wow, kind of went down here towards the end. And a lot of problems even that we have today are associated with this. And so you got to ask yourself, was that truly a blessing? Is that designed to purify us in this fiery furnace that we live? But even jumping ahead just a little bit, when Lot's daughters have children from Lot, when they get him drunk, and he accepts being drunk, the offspring from those ladies create tremendous problems for Israel. So when you deviate from God's plan, those kind of things are going to result. Not a good thing. Yes, sir.
And maybe there's a lot of ways it doesn't look like a blessing, but the lesson that you learn from looking at it in retrospect is a blessing. You know, like you look at the sin that was committed and the repercussions of that, and I don't know, that just popped into my head as you were talking.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate that perspective on it, for sure. For sure. But there's no doubt that things would have been a lot easier had they followed God's plan. And that's the lesson for us, is that God's plan, although it may not be necessarily event-free, the hand of God will guide us as long as we're following His plan. Okay. We are definitely going to have to negotiate after this class as to how we're going to move forward with the remainder of this information. But so we have this covenant being confirmed, and Abraham laughs. So God appears to Abraham at the age of 99. He confirms this covenant. And then we get into this. What was one of the conditions? Now Abraham has to do something in this covenant. What does he have to do? Circumcision. Was that absolutely necessary, the circumcision? I mean, really? Was that absolutely necessary? Yes. It was a sign of the covenant. It was absolutely necessary, right? If you were not circumcised, you were to be cut off from the people, your people, right? Okay, so what is circumcision today? What's the New Testament version of circumcision? Okay. Which is, and how do we do that physically? Baptism, absolutely, baptism. So, I'm kind of thinking, sometimes I feel like we got it really good as New Testament Christians, because I'm thinking, circumcision at 90, baptism, I'm going for the baptism, but is baptism absolutely necessary? Yes, it is. And just like circumcision was, baptism is. Okay, so the Lord promises Abraham a child, and Abraham laughs. And then later on, Sarah's informed, and she also laughs. And so, was there a difference between Abraham's laugh and Sarah's laugh? Yeah, I read a lot about that, that the laughs were different and one was for joy, and it very well could be. I don't have the right answer. We're just talking about it. But to me, when I read the two verses, the laughs appear to be for the same reason. I'm way too old for this to happen. But yet, Sarah seems to be able to get the bad rap on this. Why is that? Why does Sarah get the bad rap when she laughs? She lied about it. Yeah, she laughed within herself, so nobody heard it. The Lord called her on it, and she said, "I didn't laugh." And He said, "No, you did!" Exclamation point. And so, I don't know that there was much different in the laughs, but how they responded was Sarah lied about it. Okay, we'll stick a fork in it here, and we'll pick up somewhere around here next week. Thank you.